Lesson 11 is Nutrition, Digestion, and the Urinary System. Nutrients, which is the first part of nutrition and digestion, of course, consist of anything that you eat from food or water that gives something that is necessary for humans or animals to survive. There are 6 basic categories of nutrients. The first 3 give you energy. The last 3 are also necessary but don't give you energy. The first 3 being carbohydrates, which are like starches, sugars, things like that, basically things that can be broken down into glucose. Lipids are fats, which give you a very high energy per gram ratio, 9 calories per gram, as opposed to carbohydrates and proteins, which are only about 4 calories per gram. And then you have proteins. Proteins also give you energy, but they also are necessary for other life processes because they are formed by amino acids and they help the body make the other proteins that it needs. Vitamins and minerals are also necessary for the body for various other tasks, things like conducting impulses throughout the body, allowing the body to build certain things. They don't give you energy, but of course they're necessary to survive for various reasons. And water. Water, of course, is essential and often contains dissolved minerals, which you need for your body as well. Water is essential for many purposes, including the fact that most of your body is made up of water. Now, a calorie, which is what measures the energy in food, is not really a food measurement at all. A calorie is actually a unit of energy, or more precisely, a unit of heat. A calorie means the amount of energy required to raise 1 gram of, or to heat 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. If something cools down by a degree, 1 gram of water cools down by 1 degree Celsius, well, then it has lost a calorie. If it heats up, it's gained a calorie. The energy contained in food is essentially the food gives your body enough energy to produce that number of calories of heat. And a food calorie, by the way, is also 1,000 calories. So 1 calorie that you eat doesn't actually give your body enough energy to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. It really gives your body enough energy to heat 1,000 grams of water by 1 degree Celsius, or 1 gram of water by 1,000 degrees Celsius. Of course, your body never gets that hot, hopefully. But the point is, so a food calorie is a lot bigger than regular calorie. When you have a piece of bread that says it has 80 calories, it doesn't really have 80 calories. It really has 80,000 calories. But that's just the way we measure it. So 1 calorie is really such a small amount of energy that it really wouldn't help us very much. So that's why they're sometimes called kilocalories if you look at on labels, and sometimes, or they could be used calories with a capital C. Carbohydrates are sources of quick energy. Those include things like glucose, which is sugar, or sucrose, fructose. These are all things that are also sugar. Then there are polysaccharides, which essentially are starches, which are long sugar molecule chains, and the body, of course, can use hydrolysis to break them apart into individual sugars. If the body has enough carbohydrate and the body has enough and it doesn't need a particular piece of food that you eat, and so what the body does is the body converts it into glycogen. And glycogen is stored in a manner that it can be used quickly for energy. So athletes, people who work out, sometimes carbo load, like you eat a lot of spaghetti or bread or chips or whatever it is before a big workout or before a marathon or something, because that causes the body to store a lot of it in the form of glycogen, where it's very easily convertible into energy when you actually need it. Then you've got vitamins. Vitamins are molecules that cannot synthesize. In other words, they can't produce other things. They can't reproduce themselves. They can't give you energy, but they are necessary for cell growth, function, and development. Vitamins can be water soluble, which means vitamins that do dissolve in water. And if that's the case, they're constantly being dissolved in your blood, in the fluid in your body, and constantly being drained out and released from your body in your urine, and therefore they don't stay in the body for a long time, and they need to be eaten constantly. Something that is fat soluble, which is stored in fat, that can be held by the body over a much longer period of time. And sometimes even a low-fat diet, because these things get stored in fat, they get put in fat and they're part of the fat molecules. Not having enough fat can actually cause a deficiency in those diets. Of course, thankfully, most of us are in a position where we don't really have to worry so much about not having enough fat, but that's another issue. Here are some examples of water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. Again, you don't have to memorize this list, but this is just some examples. The B vitamins, vitamin C, folic acid, niacin, and biotin are different types of water-soluble important vitamins for the body. Fat-soluble vitamins include vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, which is an antioxidant, helps promote heart health and various other wonderful things for the body, and vitamin K, which is important for proper blood clotting. Looking at this list, by the way, in case you're wondering, I just paused it so that I could take my vitamin D pills. Very often people that live in these cold weather places and don't spend enough time outside tend to find themselves with vitamin D deficiencies. Many of you listening probably also have vitamin D deficiencies, and so sometimes doctors tell you to take pills that make up for the lack of vitamin D that we get. Vitamin D actually comes from sunlight, in addition to some of the foods that we eat, and so if we don't get enough sunlight or don't get enough vitamin D, we can take pills. Now let us move on to digestion. Here's a look at the digestive system, by the way. Sometimes I like to show you kind of a view of the digestive system before we actually look at the various parts. The digestive system starts all the way up in your mouth and ends in your rectum over here and the large intestine over here. Essentially, when you eat or drink whatever food it is, this is the mouth, of course, and then it goes through the esophagus, which is the food pipe, and then this over here is your liver, which secretes something called bile, which helps break down fats. And it actually doesn't go into the liver, it goes straight into the stomach. The stomach has acid called gastric juice, which is made partially of hydrochloric acid, which breaks down your food. Then it goes into the small intestine, which is this big thing which is this long, windy tube over here. And while in here, the nutrients that we do need to fuse into the bloodstream. The nutrients that we don't need eventually end up in the large intestine, where they move around. The water gets absorbed back into the body, and eventually it leaves the body as feces. Alright, so let's take a look at the digestive system. Digestion means the process that physically grinds up food and chemically breaks it down. There are really two different types of digestion. There is physical digestion, to physically break down the food, that starts all the way up in the teeth. Then there's chemical digestion, which chemically breaks down the food. It starts in the saliva, and it ends in the small intestine, and does lots of stuff in between. The animal digestive system, such as the human one, has a series of compartments in which food is processed, and various organs that aid in digestion, like our liver, like our pancreas, which creates insulin to break down sugar. I think we discussed that previously as well. There are some other, in this one you have the liver. The gallbladder, which is in the liver, stores bile, which breaks down fats, and it releases that into the top of the small intestine, like over here. When the food comes out over here, there's actually a little area which you don't see in this diagram at the beginning of the small intestine called the duodenum, and that's where the gallbladder secretes the bile into, and that's probably around this area over here, and that's where the fats get broken down. Carbohydrates actually start getting broken down by the saliva in the mouth, whereas meat and fats get broken down by the acid in the stomach and by the secretions in the small intestine. Animals who eat the bodies of other animals, such as, for example, meat, and plants, and vegetables, things like that, some of these are fairly difficult to digest. And so, therefore, we need a lot of help, or we need a lot of secretions and acid and whatnot to break down pretty much everything that we eat. So, here are some of the examples of secretions that help in our digestion. Our mouth contains salivary glands, and salivary glands produces, of course, saliva, which is sometimes known as salivary amylase, which is essentially the same thing as saliva. What they do is they break down starches. If you might not want to try this because it's kind of disgusting, but if you take a cookie or a cracker and you chew it up in your mouth, and you take it out of your mouth and you look at it, it's going to have a much different consistency than it did. You know, if you let it mix with the saliva for a minute or two and then you take it out of your mouth, it's going to have a much different consistency than it did before you went into your mouth, because part of it is already being digested. You also have the stomach and the mucus, and if you chew starches long enough, they'll begin to taste sweet. I don't think I've ever actually tried that. Maybe I'll try that. Take a cracker and keep chewing it up and wait until my saliva breaks it down into simple sugars, but maybe it would work. There's also mucus and water, of course, in your food pipe, in your esophagus. The stomach lining itself contains gastric juices, which contain pepsin and hydrochloric acid, which help break down the foods that you eat. And the cell lining in the stomach produces mucus that protects the walls of the stomach and the other internal organs. The small intestine produces many other secretions as well. Okay, and now we're going to move on to what happens, with the stuff that your body doesn't need. Well, as I mentioned before, the solid food that your body doesn't need eventually gets released by feces over here. This is the rectum area over here at the bottom of the small intestine. But the other part, urine, is the other metabolic wastes produced by your body. This is the waste that's produced in your bloodstream. Your bloodstream does all sorts of stuff, and there are waste products. And the waste products are filtered out by the kidney. All the blood in your body at one point or another runs through the kidney. The kidney's part of the track. Just like all the blood in your body has to run through the lungs to get oxygen, they also have to run through the kidney. And they have to run through the kidney in order to filter out the wastes, the salts, the stuff that your body does not need. And urine is this watery fluid that contains substances that have been filtered out by the blood. So the role of the urinary system, of course, is to maintain homeostasis by excreting waste caused by the cell. Cellular wastes are waste produced by the mechanisms in the cell. The cell produces stuff, and it has salts and other things that are left over. Now, the basic unit of the kidney is the nephron. The nephron, I have a little diagram over here of it. This is the kidney on the left side, which is the major excretory organ, the thing that produces the urine. Then you have the nephron on the right side. The nephron is to the kidney as the alveoli are to the lungs. Just like lungs consist of millions of alveoli, the kidney consists of millions of nephrons. And the nephron is really a filter. The nephron's got these blood capillaries, just like the alveoli. Again, a comparison, the alveoli has blood capillaries wrapping around it to have the gas exchange. Well, the nephron gets the blood from the blood capillaries and then filters out the salts, and then eventually the clean blood returns back into the capillaries. So the nephrons the kidneys are a paired organ at the waist level on the side of the spinal column. You can feel where your kidneys are. You put your hands along your sides and you feel where the bones are. Those bones, the pelvic bones, are there to protect the kidneys. If you notice in general, you have bones basically protecting all of the most vital organs in your body. Your heart, your lungs are protected by your rib cage, your brain is protected by your cranium, and your pelvic bones protect your kidneys. And the kidney has about 1 million nephrons, so that's a lot of nephrons. And the way the nephron works, essentially, it's got a Bowman's capsule at the closed end of the nephron over here. This is the Bowman's capsule way out on top over here. And from there, you have a network within the Bowman's capsule, and that filters out the fluid from the blood capillaries. And, it's not really critical that you remember all these specific names over here. Just remember the basic idea in terms of how this works. You got the blood capillaries over here, and they filter the blood into the Bowman's capsule, filters out the salts, filters out whatever needs to be gotten rid of by the body, and then it goes back into the bloodstream. And then, eventually, once all this stuff is filtered out, the salts get mixed with water, and they become urine, and then the body gets rid of it. And I guess you probably know how that happens. All right, so kidneys regulate body water content also. The more water your body has, if your body has excess water and needs to get rid of it, you go to the bathroom more. On the other hand, if your body doesn't have enough water, you go to the bathroom less. Because there is an antidiuretic hormone, which is a hormone that decreases urine production. So therefore, a person who doesn't have water, a person who goes many hours without drinking any water, will have a higher blood level of ADH, which increases the antidiuretic hormone, which decreases the production of urine. That, by the way, is when people are when people are dehydrated, their urine tends to be much more yellowish, whereas when people are drinking a lot and they got a lot of fluid, their urine tends to be more white or less yellow. And the reason is because when you don't have a lot of water in your body, the body stops producing urine. The body says, hey, we need that water. Don't get rid of it so quickly. And so the urine that it does produce is much slower and contains much more of these salts and these things that turn the urine yellow. So excess caffeine intake decreases the amount of ADH, which causes increased urination, which can lead to dehydration. That's one reason, caffeine, you drink a lot, it tends to make you go to the bathroom, and so you have to make sure, if you want to not dehydrate yourself, if you want to drink plenty of fluids, don't drink a lot of highly caffeinated fluids, because the highly caffeinated fluids are not going to help in the long run with dehydration. You're better off drinking something without caffeine. Kidneys also regulate oxygen levels with erythropoietin, which we saw earlier when we were talking about the circulatory system. It's released by the kidney in response to reduced oxygen levels, and they increase the number of oxygen-transporting red blood cells. That helps you transport more oxygen throughout the body when needed, and therefore athletes sometimes take a form of this hormone for the same reason, to increase the number of red blood cells, which increases their energy capacity. In invertebrates, I'm not even going to focus much on this, but invertebrates like sponges and small little animals, not really focused on in this course. Still, what they do is they just kind of get rid of their waste in a much less complicated manner. They don't have such complicated things like kidneys and nephrons and whatnot. And now let's look at some multiple choice. Samantha woke up late this morning and left home without any breakfast. She realized that she was late and began sprinting to the lecture hall 2 blocks away. Which of the following is a likely source for her activity? Well, she didn't eat any sugar or anything that morning, so she has to get it from a stored source of fat. So that stored source of fat, as we discussed at the beginning of the chapter, is glycogen. When you eat carbohydrates and your body doesn't use it right away, it stores it as glycogen, and therefore that's the thing that her body would be using to get the energy. A man survives on a plane crash and ends up in the desert for 2 days with no water. So what is going to happen to his ADH level, his antidiuretic hormone level? Well, think about it. The body isn't getting any liquid and it isn't getting any water, so it wants to conserve the water. In order to conserve the water, it wants to stop the urinary process, the urinary making process. Antidiuretic stops the urinary process. So it probably means the body is going to have a higher than usual ADH level, because the body is producing more of this ADH in order to stop the body from urinating, in order to conserve whatever water there is. So we'll make that C.